Welcome to the Jeremy Gorham Leadership Podcast, a conversation designed to encourage and equip ministry leaders. And now, here's your host, Jeremy Gorham.
Hey guys, welcome to the Leadership Podcast. Today, joining me on the set, if you want to call it that, is Charles, Adam, Evans, and John. I'm going to have them introduce yourself, and we're going to talk about all things small groups today.
Thanks, Jared. My name is Charles Jones. I'm over at Kenmore Alliance Church in Buffalo, New York. I've been there this is my 13th year in ministry there at the church, and served for my majority time there as the worship pastor, and I'm now the teaching pastor at Kenmore. I've been married for 16 years with 3 kids, and living large in Buffalo.
Cool. Adam?
My name is Adam Williams. I'm the youth pastor at Kenmore Alliance Church. I started as an intern 11 years ago. I've been full-time at Kenmore Alliance since 2010, and I've been married 10 years and have a daughter named May. Love life and the bills, even though it makes me love Jesus all the more. So this is it.
Evans?
Sure. My name is Evans Christian from Kenmore Alliance Church. I've been in ministry for 20 years, was in Maryland for 5 years doing youth ministry there. Then came to Buffalo and did youth ministry for 7 years and associate pastor for about 6-7 years. And now I'm doing a co-pastor model with Charles.
At a different church or
all at Kenmore Alliance Church, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
you did
14
youth
years.
there?
Yeah, 14 years at Kenmore Alliance Church, and then 5 years in Maryland. So a total of whatever. So
Cool. So these 3 guys are from Kenmore Alliance, and then Pastor Jon here.
I'm Jon Schink. I'm the Wellsville Campus Pastor at Crosstown Alliance. I do a little bit of everything. I've been married for 8 years. I have 3 kids, 6, 4, and 2. So my house is never clean, and I love it. I don't know.
I love it too.
Yeah.
My house is never cleaned either. So 4 kids of my own, and John's been here at Crosstown for
going on my 5th year.
Going on 5th year. So we want to talk to you today about how to have a successful small group ministry. My hope is that if you're listening to this and you're struggling with how to get started, that you'll glean some insight to build a strong foundation from the get-go. And then maybe you already have small groups, you'll be able to know what to do to kind of get them to be a little bit more effective. And so first off, I want to ask you guys about what are some of the biggest elements that you guys see in a successful small group ministry. You guys have experienced some success in your small group ministry. What are the key takeaways, like if you were trying to infuse them into another ministry, that you would want them to have in their small group ministry? So Evans, we'll start with you.
Sure. So as far as small groups goes, I think leadership is everything. Leadership sets the rudder as far as where it's going and stuff like that. So leadership is everything, but then also I really believe in Romans 12, 1 Corinthians 12, Ephesians, the spiritual gifts, like identifying spiritual gifts earlier on in the game where people are spiritually. For small groups, I think there's 4 spiritual gifts that are non-negotiable. The gift of teaching is definitely a non-negotiable. Mm-hmm. There's a gift of hospitality, just making everyone feel comfortable and that kind of thing. Then there's a gift of evangelism. I really believe that evangelism and missions-minded at each small group needs to be outreach focused and stuff like that. And the last gift is administration. Make sure communication is taking place. So 4
gifts being critical,
yes.
But not all 4 gifts would be necessarily the same person.
Right.
So as you're forming this group, you're looking for a combination of those gifts.
So that's the spiritual gift component, and then I think the personnel component is you need a leader. So that's going to be your teacher or what have you. You need a leader, and then you need a co-leader, so that they're working.
It's my mom. I'll have to call her back.
Cool. Awesome. So they're...
She's ruining the podcast, Mom. That's all right.
There's a vibrate thing on there, I think.
I know. We won't start over. Just keep going.
So the leader sort of, brings everyone together, but the co-leader component is working team, working in team model there. But then also the end goal is multiplication too. And so, 4 gifts, 2 people, but then there's a small group, and using those people and using their gifts as well. If there's someone that has a passion for evangelism, grab them. And if someone has a passion for administration, grab them and use them. So, I think if someone in your group can do something better than you can, you need to give that over.
Sure. I like that. When you said that off camera, that really connected with me, because I think a lot of times we just think of small groups as, okay, you got to find either a teacher, but nowadays you can use right now media, video elements for the teaching component. So now you're really just looking for someone who has a home, if you do home groups, someone who might be able to facilitate, but there's so many different factors when you're forming a successful small group. So the pushback on that, and I want to hear your feedback, is I'm a small church. We don't have a lot of leaders to begin with, and we're just trying to start things off. Like, if I have to have all 4 of those things, I'm never going to get this thing off the ground. Where do I start?
Yeah, that's a great question. Leadership, once again, if you don't have all those components, just start with 2. Start with 2 people, leader, co-leader, model, and then have them just work together really closely. I think the more they spend time with each other, the more time the small group spends time together, I really believe those other pieces will come together.
Okay.
But it's,
So it goes back to leadership, and one of the things that we talked about is starting with the end in mind, because what Jon does a great job here at Crosstown is multiplication. So you told how in your group you've been able to multiply, and one of the things that goes back to is if you don't have that co-leader that you've identified early on in the process, multiplication is going to be hard. So talk about your experience with multiplication, because that's got to be one of the key elements moving forward, thinking with the end in mind.
Well, basically what we do is we encourage all of our leaders to identify another leader, and I'm a small group leader, so it's a lot easier being the pastor to identify small group leaders and say, hey, I think you'd be a good leader. I think probably 2, 3, 4 of our groups that we currently have, whoever's leading that group was in a small group with me. But it really is selling the vision. The heart behind multiplication is selling it from the get-go, and that is, how can I achieve the maximum impact in my church and in my community? And that is, if I'm in one group and our group multiplies and we have 2 healthy groups, and then those 2 groups multiply, right, I've directly or indirectly impacted all of those people.
Yep.
So you have to sell that. You have to let people know, like, our whole purpose is to create multiple doors for people to come in. Because, like we talked about off camera, we have a lot of people sometimes that want to get in groups, but leadership is hard to find. But if you don't have good leadership, you should just go for quality over quantity.
Quality over quantity.
I like that.
So start small, build a good experience for people when they get in group, that they won't have a bad experience, they'll have a good experience. Two things that I was thinking of. One is I could share a way not to do it, because one of the small groups that we developed a few years ago in my home was trying to identify people who weren't in small groups. Okay, so that was my starting point. And then I shoulder tapped them to see if they were interested in getting into a small group. Well, that's great, but not necessarily were any of those people who wanted to host or could lead a small group at that point in time. Well, fast forward a few years later, we still have the same group, still have the same people, and we were strategically trying to get other people to join our group that had the gift of leadership, that had those spiritual components. And that didn't work out. So here we are 3 years later, and we don't have the ability yet to multiply. And we're trying to rethink through how that works. So I would say, if you have the ability, better to have 2 leaders than 1. Better to identify what those people could do in your group, so that 3 years down the road or 2 years down the road, as you said, they have the ability to multiply. Because otherwise, if you don't set it up with the end in mind, you're going to be left with leading the same group for the next 5 to 10 years, and that won't lead to multiplication. The other example I thought of when you were thinking about multiplication or talking about multiplication is our Shingle House campus. Tim Taylor had the ability to, our campus pastor in Shingle House had the ability to start 8 groups, but we kind of retracted that to maybe do 5 or 6 groups. And those other 3 groups that had leaders, we said, no, it'd be better for you to join this group rather than spread ourselves too thin. Better to have leaders in those groups when you first start off, so that you're developing a platform so that you can multiply down the road. So I'm hearing from you, leadership, multiplication. What are some of the other elements in a successful small group ministry? You want to jump in?
I think it's important. I've always heard Evans go back to what was Jesus' model, and you've talked about that a lot, and it touches on both the things that you already talked about, but that leadership development needs to happen for the leader as well. So as Jesus had his small group of 12, he had his inner 3 that could have a lot more deeper accountability and discipleship that happens on a one-on-one triads basis. And so I think it's important just as important for the leader to have their their inner three that they have as well. So I think the high accountability level needs to happen, not at the 12 level, but at the inner three level for sure.
So talk more about that, because we had talked about this grid for ministry, 3, 12, 70, 120. You had introduced that, but you really latched onto it. So I'll have Charles kind of talk about what that is with Jesus's model, 3, 12, 70, 120.
Sure. So if the end goal for each disciple is to be is the sanctification process of growing as a disciple, but then a disciple that's making more disciples. I think we heard through our discussions that we have a phrase that Evans again uses at our church a lot is big group, small group ministry. Are you in all three of those? That's what a disciple would look like. You
big group, church,
big group, small group, and a ministry service. And so that's kind of when we stepped back and looked at Jesus' ministry. That's what we see. So what I latched onto is that idea of saying, who are your 3, who are your small group, and who's your 70, who's your 120, where's your service, your ministry, your big group. So I see benefits in all three of those models.
So you're advocating for everybody being a 120, being a church,
Yeah.
everybody being a 70, being an area of ministry where you're serving through, and then everybody being a D group, which is what you guys call them, small groups, and everybody have a partner, accountability partner, a triad.
Deeper level, yeah.
That's good. That's
So
good.
the
And
component-
for what you were going back to, what you were saying is, it's not just enough for a leader to be in a group. It's good for a leader, for their health, to be in that triad as well.
Absolutely.
They're not being poured into. They can't pour out to other people. That's good.
Yeah, I think just in the youth ministry perspective, just thinking about in order for all this stuff to go and be successful, even in youth ministry, even in adult ministry, support needs to be had for those leaders. One of the things that I've noticed, working with adult leaders and working with students is just the necessity that I have to continually have checking in with those small group leaders that are leading my students and making sure that they're healthy, that they're supported, that they're in a small group themselves, that they are, not just leading from a place of, that this is kind of that you can kind of fuzzy some boundaries if you're not having that exist in your own life. Just like we talked about with the triad, like the need of having a space where I can be utterly honest, because we've had situations where we've had some unhealthy adult leaders that are leading students that didn't have those appropriate boundaries, and we're oversharing or we're doing those different things that aren't making things go as good. So I think that there's such an importance of training and encouragement to those small group leaders, to the people that are doing those things, because it is a lonely road at times. Some of these small groups are exhausting. When you get really relational and you rub shoulders with other people, it gets messy, and it's hard to be in the thick of that and not knowing if you have someone to turn to or support from your church that has launched you to be a part of something like this. So just making sure you have that.
So going back to the original question, the topic of this podcast is how to develop a successful small group ministry. If a pastor is wanting to start a small group ministry, one of the things that he needs to do is count the cost going into it, of what that time is going to entail. That they're not just going to be the leader of a small group, which that might happen. I mean, you might be leading a small group yourself.
Sure.
But if you haven't carved out time in your ministry calendar, your week, your month, and saying, I can do this, I've got time for this, to touch base with my leaders, then you might want to think twice about doing that, right?
Right.
Starting a small group ministry, because part of what you're saying is leadership has to touch base with those small group leaders.
And we were talking a little off camera, just the prioritization of our lives, the things that we think are important. Whatever we're preaching from the pulpit or whatever we're speaking about to our people, we need to be living out and doing. And especially small group ministry, where it may not be as visible to people in a larger group setting that these things are existing and happening. They have so much benefit to discipleship, so much benefit to the depth of people, instead of just counting the numbers of who's showing up on a Sunday morning, but counting the transformation of lives that are existing. And so I think just making that priority shift, happen for people, and letting our people see that, it's important, and it may not, and it involves, like I said, it's the messiness that exists there that goes beyond just touching base for an hour on a Sunday, but really getting into the life of somebody else and doing that is...
And modeling that as a leader is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Okay, so leadership, multiplication, Jesus' model of ministry, the 120, 70, 12, and 3, modeling it and using it as
And supporting people that are leading. Yeah.
Okay, so what are some other ways, some key factors within a successful small group ministry? Back to you.
Sure. So one of the components is pastoral care. Life happens, like divorce or children stuff or sickness. Life happens. I think one of the greatest assets of a small group ministry is the pastoral care component. The pastor is preaching, yeah, that's great on Sunday morning, and that's good. There's no way he's going to be able to touch the lives of the congregation. And so, yes, that's important. The 120 is extremely important, but breaking it down a lot smaller, and that's where life happens. That's where change happens, sanctification, transformation, and then trust is built, and healing happens, and forgiveness happens, and a lot of conforming to the image of Christ happens in the small group. And so that pastoral care component is bled in scriptures. And so, I think that's a non-negotiable, so making sure we are honest and transparent and vulnerable in our small groups, because you can dial it in and go to small group and check out and dial it in, but if you're not really transparent, that conforming to the image of Christ is not going to happen. So I think that's the pastoral
care. So this is a huge shift in philosophy of ministry for some people listening to this. And for the congregations that they're leading. So I going back to my story, we came here 9 years ago. There's about 40 people. We didn't introduce small groups for a year and a half. We had a Sunday school system, and there was some Sunday school classes, not very many, but we had some. And so here I am trying to sell, we didn't do it right away, but I'm trying to sell the vision of, like, eventually we're going to small groups. And one of the benefits to small groups is it's going to be pastoral care. So here I have a church at the time, 40 to 50 people. It's growing, but we still have a smaller group of people, and they're looking at me like I'm crazy because I'm like, you're our pastor. Why don't you care for us, right? Right. And so then the church starts to grow, and they're starting to see this idea of like, okay, well, now we're a church of 120. How is this one person going to effectively care for us? How are we going to do this? Exactly. And all of a sudden, the wheels start spinning in people's minds of saying, okay, well, we probably need to think through this. Either we're going to have a team of elders care for everybody, but eventually you're going to get beyond that. So here you guys are, a church of what? 700, 800 people. How many pastors do you have on staff?
The three of us.
We're looking at them.
So you're going to be able to care for 800 people, right? So that's what I'm trying to think. I'm trying to have pastors think through this as their church grows, which I think everybody listening to this wants their church to grow. Do you have enough pastors or elders to do that? And the answer is it's never going to be enough. And so if people can, that's the selling point, right? If people can really get behind this, the pastor, to have the freedom to say, I can't care for everybody, and to have the permission to say, you don't need to care for everybody in that one-on-one role. You need to develop a system and elders to be able to do that. And then, given the fact that we're selling this vision to the congregation as well, part of the pastor needs to communicate that this is going to be an avenue for caring for you. This is good for you. Certainly the pastor needs to come into situations where it's really critical, like you were saying, supporting the leaders. But you're really decentralizing, not just teaching, like a Sunday school model, but also pastoral care. You're decentralizing.
So the home groups are really key for the pastoral care. There's a lot of men's groups, women's groups, and stuff like that, but I would encourage, pastoral care to be bled into all of our small groups, but that home group is really critical. I think just the pastoral care when something happens in the home, something happens when you're breaking bread, having a meal together. So, I think it's just powerful, there.
It is a paradigm shift, though, like you said, and that doesn't matter what size church you're in, whether you're a church of 100 or a church of 800. A congregation's mindset is that they want their pastor to minister to them, but you actually get better care out of a discipleship with those that you do life with. I can remember the small group I was in just a couple of years ago. My wife underwent surgery, and I was busy with ministry, and it was the small group that cooked meals for us and drove my kids to practices, and that's something a staff could never do for me. You know, so I think it's exactly the model we see in the New Testament church. I shared with you earlier when we tried to put some framework to our small group ministry at the church. We wrapped our small groups around Acts 2, verse 42, which is they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching, to fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to prayer. And it really created this this hospitality type mentality of the priesthood of the believers, right? That's something that never really caught on from the Reformation, right? We still have this audience congregation that wants the pastor to do everything, but let's get these saints ministering to one another, and it's a much better picture.
So you mentioned the term ministering to one another. And we also, as we talked, we want the small groups to be ministered through as well, right? So we're ministering to pastoral care, but we're also ministering through. And I think the tendency in a lot of churches is people expect just the minister to, and we as pastors want the ability for our church to be ministered through. So talk about how your vision for utilizing small groups to do ministry, small groups to do outreach, small groups to meet needs.
Well, in a perfect world, the church corporately really doesn't need to do outreach if you're doing it through small groups. I think if you have a group of people that are together, that are hungry to, like you said, be ministered to but minister through, you have, instead of essentially one outreach or two outreaches a year, however many you can schedule on a church calendar, you have, I think we have 8 or 9 small groups here. You have 8 or 9 small groups that could be doing at least one outreach. So now you're talking 18 and 20 outreaches essentially in your community a year. And it's not just a come to church. It's, you have 8 to 15 people doing something and serving the community.
Being the church.
Being the church, yes.
So give an example of what, small group leaders listening to this or the pastors listening to this, and they're like, okay, what does that look like? Give me an idea of how we can do that.
Well, the easiest way is identify someone in your community. We always start out our small groups with, let's just keep our eyes open, especially in the fall semester. Christmas is coming, Thanksgiving's coming. There's obvious cultural things that we can minister to people in our community who either don't have family or don't have finances to do something. So you can always just identify a family. A lot of the schools do it as well, but just identify a family in your community that could use help with Christmas or use one Thanksgiving. Our small group essentially collected a full fixing Thanksgiving meal supplies and donated it to a family who had there were some family things came up, and he had basically inherited all his grandkids for a season. So there's just really simple things like that. We've served at essentially a soup kitchen as a small group. We went and scheduled a slot. You can do anything. It's really just finding a way to meet needs and to minister to people.
Sure. And you had mentioned you have a widow ministry, is that right, through one of your small groups, or is that one of the things that you tried to
ministry.
do?
Oil change.
Oil, yeah. To jump, I'm not sure.
You're not sure if you
yeah, I'm not sure if we have. I don't. Yeah.
He said small groups adopting single moms.
Single moms. Okay, single moms. Okay.
I was lost.
So to jump on what basically small groups ministering to. My wife works at a not-for-profit, Jericho Road. It's a medical. That's their primary thing, but they've adopted a number of different ministries, and she works with refugees. So my small group adopted a refugee family, and we just love the snot out of the refugee family. And just during Christmas time, we've done in the past the Samaritan's Purse boxes. We've done those, which we don't really know who they are, where they're going. We do trust the organization.
Sure.
But now we have pictures, and our children wrote notes and Christmas cards, and we got the kids involved. We all went shopping for we created these. I think we had 8 different children that we shopped for, and it was just phenomenal because we got pictures. It's personal, it's relational, and my wife can give us a weekly update how the kids are doing. So it's more relational.
Cool.
And I think actually from that platform, once back to spiritual gifts, we identified someone in the group had a gift of administration, right? And so I noticed a need at Kenmore Alliance Church for a Club Day co-op ministry. It's just another outreach compassion ministry. So I link those two components together. Here's this person with this gifting. Here's this need at the church. I link them together. And I don't know, 4 or 5 years later, the largest outreach compassion ministry at Kenmore Alliance Church. This past week, we ministered to over 600 people. And it all started in a small group, identifying a gifting, a need in the church, connecting the two. And because she works in her sweet spot, she's just all joy.
Sure.
So it's phenomenal
That's
to
cool.
see God work, take a small group and bleed it into the community, That's pretty cool.
It's a good vision for pastors to be able to share with their congregations that we can minister through people and not just to them.
That's right.
I think pastors would jump on board any day of the week to do that, right? So, all right. So, what? Talk about this. I know we have different philosophies in the church world, and so some people would say organic versus semester-based, right? Sermon-based groups versus topical groups. Let's talk some about the nuances of small group ministry. So let's start with the organic versus semester-based. What's the right approach? Is there a right approach? Is it a mixture of things? What are the pros and cons between each?
Jeez. I think it really depends. You have to ask what you want to get out of the group. I think ultimately we talk about home groups versus whatever, and you hear our hearts, all of us, that home groups are really where you dig in. I would say organic groups are usually the ones where people dig in. There's a longer commitment. Even the groups that multiply, there's just something different about an organic group. A semester group meets a lot of needs, though.
Let's clarify. Organic being that there is no end date.
Right.
It's with the hope that we build enough good relationship with each other.
We're inviting people into our group. We're saying we're starting with 8, and the group is awesome. Everyone loves the group, and they're like, "Hey, come check out our small group." That grows, and then you go like that. Semester is great. I think it gives an opportunity you can look at the needs of your congregation, and a small group semester is a great way to address those. We have a young congregation, so recently we've asked how can we address this. So we've used this small group semester to really dial in and do a couple strategic things, such as a starting point group, which identifies, it's more of something you'd gear, like if you're new to the church, if you have questions about faith, if you want to ask questions about Jesus, this is a good group for you. It's, we limit to 12 people in the group, so they get a feel of being in a group of people. And then we've just started inductive Bible study, where it's just, a semester where we just really teach people, hey, this is how you read your Bible. These are some things to look for. This is how you can break this stuff down. You don't have to be a scholar to read your Bible. So it's I think it's both and it really depends on what you want to do. Ultimately, we want people to get into those organic or home groups, but let's build in a platform to get them there. Let's just not tell them where they're going. Let's show them how to get there.
Yeah, I think that's good just for starting off. You can be so rigid to say this is the way we're going to do it that you don't provide the on-ramps for other people. The semester babes are on-ramps for people to get into those groups to kind of get a taste for them.
I think I would echo just some of that, we need to have different levels of engagement for people because schedules and where people are at, that's why you have some men's groups, women's groups, that's why there's youth ministries, there's different places where we want to funnel people, and some, we would say, the greatest value for your time, we'd say, yes, being in a community in someone's home, but that may not be a reality for some people's lives. And so you say, hey, we've got a women's group that meets in the morning, we have a men's group that meets, in the evening, or different things that are opportunities and that are gonna work on different things, from an inductive Bible study to just an accountability structure where you're getting together and praying. We have prayer night on Wednesday night at our church, and we've started prayer on Sunday morning. We have different areas where we know it's going to stretch people in different ways, or people are going to be funneled there. So I think it's good to have a balanced diet when you're trying to figure out and grow in different areas, and as a leader identifying for that person where you could challenge them to say, I think it would be really good for you to sit in on prayer because that's something you struggle with, or hey, I think it'd be great for you to dive into an inductive Bible study because you're really struggling with maybe what it looks like to read my Bible on my own. And so that's getting to know your people through small groups, through the things that we've got going on, so that we can best equip and give them the things they need in the time that they're in.
So a pastor listening to this and he wants to start small groups, one of the things that he's got to communicate to people is why small groups. And one of the things I'm hearing you say is decentralized groups help. The old model is Sunday morning, if you're available Sunday morning at between 9 and 10 a.m. between the services or whatever, then you can be in a small group. You can be in a group. You can be in an environment where you can be discipled. So one of the selling points of small groups is decentralizing to different times, topics, seasons of life. all those things.
And it equips and values people much more than just saying the pastor can do everything, because that's not our job. I think that there's a misnomer of what our job as a pastor is. Our job as a pastor is to do everything. No, our job as a pastor is to equip and train the saints to do the ministry.
That's right.
Like that's why we're here. Like we're here to
Preach it!
youth pastor. What's happening?
He actually let him preach too.
That happens once a month, but then the numbers are down that week. But no, I think it's just an opportunity that we have to just remind people that we're people too. We have flaws, we have issues, but we have the same Holy Spirit that lives inside of us, that lives inside of you, and you have gifts and talents that you need to be using. And if I'm just doing everything, I'm not allowing you to do that. Yeah. And so that's why we're kind of, as I mentioned before, it's messy. Like you're gonna walk in and you're gonna be like, I put that person in leadership, they weren't ready yet. We got to backtrack, we got to do some different things, but it's worth it. Yeah. For those moments where you see, hey, we are able to multiply because I brought a younger leader along for 4 or 5 years, and even my bringing up with Evans, like I was brought in as an intern for 3 years, and I interned and made a lot of mistakes and did a lot of things.
Made a lot of mistakes.
We
and talk about those.
And it was just good for me to be under the umbrella of someone else's leadership, so that when I was launched, I was able to have that that freedom to be like, yeah, I've learned a lot, I've grown, and then looking at that same mentality and what I'm doing, how can I equip somebody behind me? And because that's how we all should be, just not even as pastors, but as human beings. Yeah. Like we're supposed to be multiplying.
So let me push on that 1 second, because the tension that people are going to feel when starting small groups is the idea that I can control everything as the pastor and leader, and so we have one group, or if you have 2 pastors, you got 2 groups, or if you just want to say the elders can do it, maybe you've got 6 groups. So part of this tension is going to be taking your hands off the wheel a little bit. Mm-hmm. Obviously, there's probably some criteria for small group leaders.
And that's why you have the care and the connection with those adult leaders as you build trust with them. And saying, yeah, you know what, I trust that person. They may make mistakes, but we'll deal with that and walk through that as those things come up. But we have to give people opportunities to play in the sandbox and have an opportunity to, just get to know how I'm equipped and how I'm gifted.
So elders and pastors listening to this, you gotta deal with that tension of saying the person might make mistakes, but it's worth it because multiplication, disciples are going to be made as a result of it, and we'll deal with the messiness. Mm-hmm. But we gotta get outside the mindset of only a few people can do this. Yeah. There's ways around that. You can use video teaching through Right Now Media. I mean, if they don't have the ability to teach, that's not the limiting factor per se. Mm-hmm.
Well, you need to equip them with resources. Before we did Right Now, we would order curriculum if someone had a study. Like you have to equip your leaders.
Yeah.
We also vet a curriculum. I think there's a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
I know. I don't know if you want to talk about that.
Yeah. Where do you get your curriculum from?
I think people that are passionate about my small group leaders, I ask them to do the research and stuff like that, and then they come back with the curriculum, and then I actually have to vet the curriculum. Okay. So Lifeway is a good resource. I know MacArthur studies those Bible studies. He has the books of the Bible, that kind of stuff. Yep. Right Now, we've used in the past here and there. So
just for clarification, Right Now Media is an online ministry library, resource library with all kinds of either kids stuff, they have youth ministry stuff, they have adult Bible studies, they have conferences, leadership training, and it's a 1-year subscription that you have to renew, and then you have access
based on the size.
Not only you have access to it, but your congregation
has access to it.
Yeah, you still need to vet that stuff too. I've found that even on Right Now Media, not everything is. I would be like, that's my stamp of approval. You guys should totally be listening to this teaching.
Sure, that's a resource.
Yeah,
you listed some other resources. Okay, so what about sermon based versus topical? How have you leveraged sermon based? You do it once every 18 months. We have a different approach. Just talk about that.
Yeah, I think the sermon base is Sunday morning. I think the Word of God is articulated and communicated and proclaimed, and that does heart surgery in people's hearts in the pews, but then they need a place to process that. Healing needs to happen, forgiveness needs to happen. And so I think we haven't really landed, but we do it for our vision and stuff like that. Sermon-based small groups I think we'll have to talk about that, but a lot of that stuff can happen in the small groups, discussing what's going on, linking the sermon and linking what's going on at home and having that conversation.
So even in the weeks that you don't do sermon-based questions, you're hoping through the Holy Spirit's leading, through the leader's discernment that they're going to, no matter what study they do, try to link what people are processing from Sunday morning. Let's say Charles preaches what Charles just preached about to what they're studying. That you're relying on the leader to kind of connect the dots together for people.
Yeah, so it's like you get hit twice. You get hit Sunday morning, and then you get to process it in the small group, and you get hit again. And I think it's sanctification. It's process. It's not just one and done. It's just definitely taking steps. And then in that process, I really believe that life on life happens, and people share their vulnerable spots or their hurt spots, and then pastoral care once again can happen that way as well.
Yeah, processing the sermon is one of the key takeaways when I was listening to earlier. It's just providing an environment to process the sermon for life change. Jon does do sermon-based questions that he's in charge of writing those questions out each week. And so talk about what that's like, and probably as a resource, we'll let you guys download just like a PDF version so that you kind of have a template, right?
Yeah, I mean...
what are the benefits? What kind of what does that look like? What does these sermon-based questions look like, or sermon-based groups look like?
Well, in most churches, I say most because I'm sure there's some that aren't, but whoever the communicator is, that's kind of the visionary. That's kind of the direction, whatever God's laying on their heart to communicate is kind of the direction the church should be moving in. Or
the pastor, the preacher?
Yes.
Okay.
So sermon-based for me is not adding legs to the sermon, so to speak, but like, hey, if we're going through a sermon series and we kind of want to get the congregation going in the same direction, or thinking on the same things, or working on things, why not just have them discuss it? And not just discuss things that stand out, but like, what does this look like in your life? Because the reality is, just like Evans is saying, it's messy. And with sermon-based, the whole purpose is to not say, well, I'm glad you felt somewhat convicted listening to that, but why? Like what? Because in reality, any sermon that gets preached, all of us, even as pastors, there's an area in our life that it kind of stings in, or that that some person that we're having anger issues with, if that's the topic, or where we're missing the mark on community, or so sermon based allows us to really get into that and give steps, talk about what does this look like in my life right now, where am I at, and how do I practically, as an individual or as a group, how can we move down the field together? How can we sanctify each other through this process?
So highly application oriented. Okay, it helps process the sermon. I like that. Is there a place for topical then? And
Yeah, so a few of my men's just do the Bible. They pick a book of the Bible and they just drip feed verse by verse. So that's one component. And then we have a hope and healing, individuals that have gone through crisis, and so they'll do topical, and it's more laser specific on what they're going through. And AA, as I say, we have a free indeed component, and so they're focused on what their struggles are, and they'll go deeper into that. So how
are you communicating those groups then? When do you advertise? How do you advertise?
So
when do people sign up?
Well, we actually did a major shift. We've been doing Acts 2:42 as our old model, and then we just recently said, hey, we're going to just, all of our groups are going to be called D groups, and so we need to do a better job. But the way we're communicating is whether it's a free indeed group, a hope and healing group, a home study, a men's group, a women's study, they're all D groups,
Discipleship
and
groups.
they're all discipleship groups, and get plugged into something, and so it's all on the website, and just
So it's
encourage
ongoing sign up?
It's ongoing. Well,
Or do you
that's
have
a great question. That's a great.
I know.
So the men's, very good. Wow, you've done this before. So the men's groups, you can dip in and dip out at any point.
Okay.
So that
It's
I think
probably similar to ours.
that's interesting because so that works for the men's groups. The women's groups, there's an on ramp and an off ramp. There's semesters,
Okay.
and then the home groups, there's also semesters. So it's
When
just
does that semester start?
so we function on a 3-semester. There's a fall semester from September to November. Then there's January to March, and then March to May.
So you go to the end of November, take December off.
Take December. There's Christmas going on, and everyone's going nuts.
What's
so.
happening in December then?
So
Communicating what the next semester is?
actually,
Yes.
communication happens in the middle. So it's October now. I'm planning for January. I need to have heavy conversations. What are we doing in January? I'm sorry, my bad. I'm having heavy conversations on what's our plan for January? What are we missing? A lot of evaluation, a lot of with the other staff. What do we need to do for the next step? Yeah.
So that's the internal conversation. What
Right.
happens with the external promotion? When do people see what's happening for the next semester?
So we'll probably launch videos in late December, early January, and we'll start small groups around January 15th.
Okay.
Yeah.
Second or third week of January.
Right.
Take December off.
Right. And I think people need rhythm. I think that's why we've gone to the semester model and expectations. Hey, so September to November, I'm all in. I can chill out, relax in December, and I'm back at it.
Yeah.
In January. So, and we're okay with people taking a semester off. If life's too crazy, someone gets sick, take a semester off. You're still connected, you're still being loved on, and it's okay to take but it's a priority that everyone is in a small group.
So going back to the organic versus semester-based, the people that are already sold out for small groups, that are already invested in small groups, they don't really have a problem with they might want a week off or 2 weeks off, or maybe let's take a month off or whatever. But you don't really have to convince them of the end date and stuff. I think it's the people, this is the balance of the two, it's the people that aren't really understanding what small groups are. They have never been in a small group, that it's important to have a start point and an end point, because that's the way our culture
Right.
is, that rhythm.
Expectations.
I don't go to anything that doesn't have an end date or end time. I mean, it's kind of a little weary about that, you know what I mean? So even in my own personal approach to different things in society, that's how we operate usually. It's always a start point and end point.
But for pastors and churches that might be looking to start this, I think what we've learned in trial and error is this is a place where you can be creative. I don't think there's a one size fits all, whether it's topical or curriculum based or even schedule. We've gotten really creative now. One of the benefits of our size church is that we've got almost like a smorgasbord of options. So we've got those curriculum, Dave Ramsey's financial piece or art of parenting type stuff. But then there's just guys groups that are just going through Ephesians or going through Colossians or going through. So we've got a little bit of everything, but we also got creative with the time structure. So for instance, we noticed, probably 7-8 years ago now, that our men's ministry was really weak, was not doing a good job. So Evans put a full court press on this, basically no man left behind kind of idea, where
That's
we're
good.
gonna create a men's group on every day of the week and also every time frame of the day, so that no guy has an excuse not to be involved in at least one group. So we've got groups in the early morning, we've got groups in the evening, and I get the benefit of running one of the groups that really one of our late people started with me because he was a second shift, third shift worker, and he said neither of those time frames work. Can we do something in the middle of the day? So on Tuesdays at 11 a.m., I've got a small group of men that we just go through a book of the Bible. Right now we're going through Nehemiah. And I'm pushing 20 guys at 11 o'clock in the middle of the day on Tuesday that are either retirees or second or third shift workers. So you can get creative, I think, when you're starting these things and just throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks, see what your church responds to.
That's really good.
One of his latest additions was partnering with other churches that do this fight club thing for men. Okay, this is a complete, everybody.
Fight Club is hardcore.
Yeah, and the
Not
problem
for
is
boys.
we can't talk about Fight Club. So.
There is no fight club.
But this targets a completely different set of guys that want to kick in the pants spiritually, physically, nutritionally, and they do something that's completely different than all of our other stuff, and it hits a different group of guys. So
That's cool.
Get creative with this stuff, I think.
Very good idea. So, what were you talking about? Semester based.
Yeah, semester
When you
based.
start and all that stuff.
On ramps, off ramps. You mentioned people like schedules, people like rhythm. I think
Yes.
that's important.
Yes,
so.
now I know what I was going to say.
Right.
You at YD groups. I think what you said earlier to me
Sure.
was important.
So
Made me think.
Sure, we shared earlier that we've learned from our youth ministry and our children's ministry and the adult ministry, as we've been a small group church now for 15, 20 years, is how can we do this better? And we liked the structure of the youth ministry, as they kind of called this phrase D groups or discipleship groups. And we realized, you know what, in the adult way, people hear the word small group and they think, well, I'm not in a home group. And we were thinking, well, we just mean any small group. It could be inside the church, outside the church, whatever. So we just kind of restructured how we're calling it. We're calling everything discipleship groups.
Or let me add to that. Or don't really like small groups.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
yeah.
But as a Christian, I know discipleship is what I'm called to.
Right.
Okay, so you're hitting at the heart of the issue and
Absolutely.
getting past all the nuances of what that might
Or you
entail.
go down south and they call them cell groups, and it totally freaks you
Yeah.
out, right? It's like,
We got a guy that calls them that.
yeah.
I have some objections to that.
So we learned that from our youth ministry, but then the children's ministry actually revamped their whole midweek program based on that as well. And they said, you know what, if we're a small group church, let's start teaching our children K through 5
Yeah.
how to do small groups. So they reformatted our midweek program for them and taught the kids.
And
how to do
you're
small
really
groups.
creative with that. So Adam, talk about your idea for what you guys do with the kids and the
Yeah.
students. Talk
Yeah,
about
so in youth ministry, when I was kind of getting started and getting things going, I was looking for resources, looking for things to kind of train me up and learn as I was going. And I met a guy named Rick Mills, and Rick Mills wrote a book called The Big Turnover, and it's all about empowering student leadership, empowering students to lead, and so that's something I've really modeled a lot of what I do on. Is I want to empower kids to find out their gifts, use them, and give them those opportunities. And he in his book talked a lot about D groups, about hey, every kid should be if it is involved in using their gifts on up front all around, need to be involved in a D group. And so we have in our senior high ministry, we have D groups that meet outside of our normal time, and they spend time with a leader that's just either going through a book study or going through the Bible
in their home.
Or
at church?
at Panera, at anywhere. Like they kind of meet off site in different times, figuring out. We got a group that meets on like Monday nights. We have a group that meets on Saturday mornings. We have groups that meet on right before youth group.
Yeah.
So we have lots of different options that we have, dependent on leaders that are willing to take this extra time to do that. But it's just something that we've seen just such a great benefit from, just seeing especially students getting that extra investment. And then there has to be a willingness too. Like we're not pushing anyone to say, if you don't want to be in a D group, don't be in a D group. Because we do kind of small groups in our regular night as it is, but they're more discussion groups. They're not like, hey, we're diving deep in everybody's life, because you really can't, because it's always different kids walking in and out. But we invite people to say, hey, if you want to grow deeper, you got to intentionally invest that time and give into that. And so, yeah, we've just seen a lot of really cool stories and encouragements from those things. And then especially even my leaders that give that extra time, they love it. And giving that extra time to students and seeing their investment and seeing their eyes open up when
Awesome.
they read the Bible or learn about that, and then that confidence that they have. I was mentioning off camera when we had I had just had a conversation last night with a student who was just talking to me and asking some advice about, and I've seen her grow. She comes from a non-Christian background and has just grown tremendously, and she's in a D group, and she's asking, I've got a friend in our youth ministry that I don't think is growing and is actually falling away and doing some things. What would you suggest? How do I do that? And her teachability in that, I think, has a lot to do with, because she's been in environments where she's been invited to ask questions and grow and have been invested in. And so,
Cool.
yeah.
That's really good. So children's ministry, you're infusing this all the way down. What you said? What are they called? Cross
Cross-training. Yeah, cross-training. It's called cross-training
Different than
for kids.
Awanas.
Yeah, they
so
are.
What do you do? This is a cool idea.
Yeah, so they, a few years back, our children's director at the time, Cheryl Rinker, had this idea to say, you know what, we should do something a little bit different than Awana. We want to kind of bleed this culture of small groups, not just into our adults and students, but into our kids. And so she began replacing that program with this kind of self-made program about 5-6 years ago that we started doing small groups for kids. And they're structured based on an activity, something that they like. They're gender-based, and then they all have a Bible lesson. So when I have a girls group that loves to dance, and we'll have a dance group there, but then they're going through a Bible lesson and learning how to pray for one another, taking prayer requests, doing those things. And it's just been really cool. So I've even seen that benefit in my middle school ministry, where I've got kids that are already used to that structure, walking into a room and saying, yeah, we pray for each other. We share prayer requests. We do those things because we're preparing kids to do that, so that when we get them to adulthood, 10 years down the road here, that we're like, this is a natural progression of life.
Easier transition.
So
list some more activities just for ideas.
yeah, so they got a dance
Dance.
group. They have we have one of our small group leaders there, Neil Gordanis, loves like science experiments. So we have like a guys group that does like crazy science experiment stuff and uses the Bible and shows them that. We've got some different fitness groups, crafting groups. So yeah, it's based on, and this is where you kind of take your people based on the gifting of the people that we have and say, okay, what are you passionate about, and letting them use that. For me, I'm a board game nerd. I love board games, and so like I have a group that I get guys together, and we've kind of made this group where we have like middle schoolers to 60-year-olds getting together on a quarterly basis, hanging out and playing board games and building relationships. And so it's taking things that people are already passionate about. Yeah, and bringing that passion and then allowing them to have a platform to use that for the gospel. Taking that thing and that they love and helping them do that. So we really look at the leaders we've got. We put those things online. People can then register. They cap out a certain number, I think about 10 per group. And it's been really a successful thing and really helped our kids learn in a small group environment, helping that structure has bled through our whole church.
That's cool. Got anything else?
No, I like the interest-based small groups just because with the kids using their gifting, I think it's important. And then another thing is just bleeding it from a really early age. Like, so my daughter is 9 years old, and she knows she's in a D group. And so as she, gets older, my desire for her is to continue to stay in a D group.
Sure.
And that language is consistency, So, yeah, high school, then college, and then post-college, and then adulthood. Stay connected with, it's a non-negotiable to be connected to a D group.
It's that idea, the way we say it, one of our core values is that we're a church of small groups. That we're not just a church with small groups. Like it's not just a side ministry of what we do.
Yeah,
it's something. It's part of our DNA. It's who we are.
I think it goes back to Jesus' strategy. We talked about earlier, the 3, the 12. That's Jesus' strategy. We do life together, and we really need to. Lot of things happen through small groups for sure.
Cool. Resources, best resources. This is a good starting point. Someone listening to this that wants to know more about small groups or wants to be like get excited about the vision for small groups or talk about the nuts and bolts of small groups. What would you guys pass
I'll jump out first. There's this book. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but my men love it. They're all about it. It's the Bible.
You sound like Jon Schink.
No, dude.
66 books.
It's 66 books, multiple authors, all saying the same thing. It's phenomenal.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, but I'm telling you, drip feeding the Word of God into people's hearts and lives, they conform to the image of Christ. It just happens. So, the Bible.
So, pastors listening to this,
Jesus.
read the Bible.
Yeah, that's what I recommend.
Okay, great.
That's my resource. That's all I got. That's all I got.
Trump that.
What's all that? Any resources that you want to pass on to people?
I would say if you're a pastor trying to sell a congregation moving forward, I think one of the things my previous church, when we really punched small group down their throats and created the culture, was Andy Stanley does a small group video series called Community, where he basically lays out the who's, what's, and whys. So decentralizing, like the pastor trying to convince everybody, it's, hey, let's get together, let's start that one or two groups for quality, and let's go through this together. And then, basically you're ingraining them with what community is. But,
So that'd be a good, a pastor listening to this wanting to start small groups, they have 2. And so those 2 small groups could do that curriculum.
And then kind of get the idea of this is what we're going to do going forward, regardless of what we're talking about or what. This is the purpose of what we're doing. So whatever the content they're going through, whether it is a drip feed, whether it's a topic, whatever it is, this is why we're doing it, and this is what we're going to do with this information. So we want to be transformed through what we're taking in, but we also then want to go out.
Good, that's a good resource. What else?
This is an old one. I say old because it's 1990, which for some people probably isn't that old, but
For us.
it's how to lead a small group or how to lead small groups. This is, but it's not just like home groups or stuff like that. It's also Bible study groups. It really covers all the different types of group. It's a great resource and tool. This one is my favorite if you are trying to kind of calibrate or get a feel for why or what. It's from couch to community. It is a fantastic, it's a really great read. There's a lot of resources, whether you're a small group leader or you're in a small group or you are just trying to communicate to your congregation. And then this one is great. It's called the Small Group Leaders Kit. Dave Early wrote it. It's got a lot of tips for discussion, a lot of also that idea of with a leader, and Evans touched on it, is tweaking yourself, making sure, and Adam talked about it. If you're a leader, you need to make sure you're preparing yourself like a leader. So a lot of this is in here, making sure you're doing what you need to be doing, but also like how you can then equip the people behind you, and also some tips on how to do it. So
10 powerful tools for personal leadership development. Cool.
It's really good.
You guys got anything?
I've got a bunch of older resources that we've used over the years. They're small group curriculums in a book, like 13 weeks, 10 weeks. Serenity House was the publisher that put out a bunch of these. Everything from the parables of Jesus to setting your moral compass to going through different books of the Bible. But the reason why I like these is that for each week it provides the scripture reading, it provides an icebreaker question, it provides discussion questions. So as I'm leading my group and I'm a trained leader, but I want to start raising up other leaders in my place, I can hand them the book and say, listen, no pressure. You could literally read this word for word and facilitate a small group, which people are scared to death to do. They're scared to death to do that. So it gives them that stepping stone to try it. And those come in handy for multiple reasons.
So what's the name of it? Where do they find it?
So going off of memory, I know Serenity House is the publisher. That's the logo I remember off the bottom. I think you could go to christianbook.com and look
A place. It's a place.
Serenity now.
It's online.
I've got like 20 of them sitting on my bookshelf.
Hopefully after this, Charles will go back to his office and
Jeremy will post the link to
Yes,
the books,
yes.
the resources.
that will do that. Okay, remind me.
But that is what he brings a point to is how one of the ways that we do our sermon base is that because we do provide them questions and we lay it all out. That's another thing. If you're going to do, I would tell someone if they're going to do sermon base and want to focus on that, to have either the communicator themselves, the lead pastor who's doing most of the communication, or somebody, and it can even be a lay leader. I did this as someone who was not on staff before at my formal church, before I was brought on staff, is listen to the sermon, read through the manuscript, pick out chunks for them to kind of the scripture read through, but also provide the questions that you want all your groups, because that also allows us to be like, I'm not going to facilitate this week. We're talking about the sermon. Here's the questions. You just facilitate conversation. So that's a good point.
Good. Adam?
Yeah, so I mentioned before a big turnover by Rick Mills, but then another thing that we've used in the past and I think is helpful in student ministry context is this thing called soul exercises. Soul exercises is a thing that it was developed by an organization that I've worked really closely with, Never the Same. They have a camp that we take our students to every summer. But Soul Exercise is a Bible engagement curriculum, basically. And it is 6 weeks at a time. And what students are able to do is they're able to kind of pick what level of engagement they want to engage the study with. So it's a small group kind of thing. You have 6 weeks at a time. You could pick, hey, I'm going to do 101, which means I'm just answering one question, and then I'm entering into that small group discussion with at least something. 201 means, hey, I read 5 times this week and I answered all the questions. 301 is I'm adding another chapter reading of the Bible and I'm doing the reading here and answering the question. And then added in like fasting and different things like that. So different disciplines where you can amp it up depending on where you're at. And so it just allows you to meet the levels of lots of different people within your group, because you might have a new believer to a grizzled veteran when it comes to following Jesus. And so you've got all of these different types of people that are there that you're able to then say from 101 to 701. They're able to do that. So they have an app that'll be coming out soon, but they have stuff online that you can purchase and have a subscription basis for.
Say the name of it again.
Soul Exercises.
Can you give me the link?
Yeah,
so I
can
can
do
include
that.
that.
Not a problem.
That'd be good. All right, I think we've gone over a lot. I think what we're all saying is small groups are important. Leader needs to lead the way. It's a great source for pastoral care and leadership development. It's a great way to mature people, get people connected in the church. It's all about leadership and spiritual gifts. component of it as well, thinking through that. So to close, Charles, what would you say? You get elevator pitch to your congregation that's not really involved in small groups. You're trying to start this, trying to really cast this vision. What are you going to say?
I'm going to say for us to be disciples of Jesus Christ, we have to be engaged with other disciples and growing in our faith, but multiplying that faith in others. So this is a non-negotiable to be small group. To be a small group church is to be a follower of Christ, for sure.
Cool. I like that. Going back to the why. I like that. Well, thank you guys for sharing your insight and expertise and your knowledge and experiences. Hopefully this will generate a lot of thought in people's minds, and hopefully I'm praying that this would be a catalyst to many other churches really getting serious about what you just said and the idea of small groups. That is pretty impressive. I set an alarm for how long we should go, and it just ended. So with that, let's drop the mic.
Boom.
It's out. See you guys.